I ruined my perfect family after my husband caught me cheating with my boss. He went to prison for assault. Now, 7 years later, he's out while I'm all alone, and my kids hate me. I'm a selfish person, or at least that's what I tell myself repeatedly, almost every night, when I hear the silence in my home. My children aren't here. My ex-husband hates me, with good reason. My immediate family is divided, and I never stopped hating myself for what I did. My selfish act happened in 2015. I had just turned 39, and I admit I took my ex-husband for granted. He always told me that I was beautiful on a daily basis, always wanted to have sex, took care of me, and treated me like his equal. He never treated me like a queen or a princess. I was his partner. We had been married for 20 years by that time. High school sweethearts, each other's one and only, and it felt right. My family loved him. My brother looked up to him, and my ex helped him through a lot of tough situations. My ex was the one people called when they were in trouble, and he helped them. He was a good man. Through the years, I gave him 2 headstrong boys, who at the time of this story were 18 and 16, and twin princesses, aged 13. I had gained weight and felt self-conscious, but he would always tell me that I was beautiful. Our arguments were always few and far between. We talked everything out, but when we did argue, it was usually about sex, or rather, the lack thereof on my part, and the things I refused to do in bed. It wasn't that I didn't want to do them, I just wasn't in the mood, and he understood. When I turned 39, my birthday party revealed the new me. I had spent all year in the gym, doing yoga and Pilates. My efforts took me from 180 pounds to 135, and for me, it was an amazing transformation. I had always been a chubby girl, so to have a body that was tight and fit was a new experience. My ex-husband also went to the gym with me, though not as much. However, he went from 260 pounds to 225 and was starting to shape his body. My ex-husband couldn't keep his hands off me, but for some reason, I still wasn't in the mood. It's not like he didn't try. We went to dinners, danced, and did regular walks. He always helped around the house, and I could see in his eyes how much he loved and lusted for me. 20 years together, and he still looked at me with desire. I believe any woman would desperately want that, but mentally, I just wasn't in the mood. At the time, I thought I was going through early menopause since we only had sex maybe 2 or 3 times a month, and I was just a one and done. But he wanted more, and no matter how much he tried, I just wasn't into it. He mentioned couple counseling, and I refused. And so, my selfishness came into play. A new manager started working in my office a few days after my birthday. He was slightly younger and handsome, and for some reason, he took an interest in me. At first, I ignored him. Then, it went from ignoring to casual conversation. Then he flirted, and I showed him my ring. However, after 2 months of constant flirting, I flirted back, which led to me telling him about my life. I found myself thinking about him more and more. This was an emotional affair, I know that now, but at the time, I felt high. My ex-husband suspected something was off with me. We had a heated argument about it, one that I believe I started. He went to kiss me, and I subconsciously made a disgusted look. It wasn't directed at my ex. I was thinking about this other man when he leaned in, and I felt disgusted with the whole thing, or at least that's what I tell myself. A week after that day, I told the new manager to meet me at a cafe so we could talk. I had every intention of telling this man to leave me alone. I had every intention of telling him that I couldn't do this, but before I could say anything, he kissed me, and my mind went blank. That was the beginning of our 6-month affair. During that time, I did things with him that my ex-husband had always wanted but I had always refused. I was more eager, more willing, and always in the mood. I believe it was because it was something new and exciting. My ex and I still had sex during this time, but not as frequently. I began pushing him away, nitpicking on the little things and even belittling him. I'm ashamed of how I treated him during that period. I only realized what I was doing when my brother came to visit and told me that my ex had confided in him. My ex was feeling depressed and was considering filing for separation. He told my brother that he felt I didn't love him anymore and that he was starting to fall out of love with me. That snapped me out of it. I immediately called off the affair, quit my job, and promised myself that I would make my husband feel loved and wanted again. I was determined to fix our marriage and be a better wife. But then my affair partner, AP, showed up at my house with a box of my office stuff that I had requested to be shipped. We talked, and he wanted to know what he did wrong. I told him that I needed to fix my marriage and asked him to leave. He begged for one last time together, and like a fool, I agreed. We went to the guest room and had sex. I don't know how long we were at it, but while he was on top of me, I suddenly felt him jerk violently, and there was a loud bang. I sat up, and there was my ex-husband standing in the doorway, staring at us. My AP was on the floor, and there was a large hole in the wall. I tried to say something to my ex, but his eyes were bloodshot, tears were flowing down his face, and his lips were trembling. He looked like he was in so much pain, and I felt utterly disgusted with myself. My AP tried to leave, but my ex looked at him with fury. My AP, in a moment of arrogance, told him that if he knew what was good for him, he would step back. That's when my ex attacked him. I screamed and cried, begging my ex to stop. In desperation, I jumped on his back, which only resulted in me getting slammed to the floor. Everything became hazy for a while, and the sounds around me were muffled. When I came to, my ex was on the phone with 911, while my AP lay on his side, beaten and bloodied. I stared in shock at my AP's swollen face and the blood and teeth on the floor beside him. There was a loud bang on the door, and my ex calmly placed the phone on speaker, put it down, then dropped to his knees with his hands behind his head. The police entered, handcuffed him, and the paramedics arrived moments later. I soon learned that he had called 911 on himself. At the hospital, things went from bad to worse. My father didn't say a word to me. He just looked at me with shame. My brother was furious, yelling at me, crushed by what I had done to my ex. My mother tried to console me, but this only led to my father yelling at her. My ex's family was livid. His sisters threatened me, and his parents looked like they wanted me dead. When I approached my children, they refused to speak to me. My sons couldn't even look at me. My AP was severely injured and required reconstructive surgery on his face. My ex had practically shattered it. At the hospital, a woman came into my room and immediately attacked me. My brother pulled her off of me, and it turned out she was my AP's wife. I didn't know he was married. He never wore a ring or mentioned it. This revelation made me feel even more terrible. In the lead up to the trial, my boys stayed with their grandparents on my ex-husband's side, and my daughters refused to talk to me. My ex didn't want to see me either. I tried visiting him at the county jail, but I was denied. My brother, who worked at a correctional facility, made sure my ex was transferred there so he could keep an eye on him. Now, 7 years later, I'm alone. My children hate me, and my ex-husband, once my high school sweetheart and partner of 20 years, has every reason to despise me. My family is shattered, and I live with the guilt and shame of my actions every day. At the hospital, a woman stormed into my room and immediately attacked me. My brother pulled her off of me, and I soon found out that she was my affair partner's AP wife. I had no idea he was married. He never wore a ring, never mentioned it, nothing. That realization only deepened my sense of guilt. As the legal process loomed, my boys went to live with their grandparents on my ex-husband's side, and my daughters refused to talk to me. My ex didn't want to see me either. I tried visiting him in the county jail, but I was denied. When I asked my brother to relay a message to him, he told me to go to hell. During the trial, I saw my ex for the first time in months. The look of anger on his face was unbearable. He had always looked at me with love, even when we were upset with each other. But at that trial, all I saw was hate, and it hurt more than I could ever have imagined. I had to excuse myself to cry in the restroom. As the trial progressed, I was forced to recount my affair in excruciating detail for everyone to hear. When I revealed how long it had lasted, my ex looked devastated, and my father stood up and walked out of the courtroom. During my ex's testimony, I learned that he had come home to surprise me with lunch and plans for a romantic weekend trip for two to the Catskills. Instead, he walked in on my affair. He explained that when the AP ordered him to step aside, he snapped and attacked him. He only stopped when he threw me off him. After that, he quickly called 911. Hearing the 911 recording in court, hearing his pain and sobs as he followed the operator's instructions, it was crushing. My AP couldn't testify verbally because of his injuries and was heavily medicated, so they used images of his battered face in court. Seeing those images turned my stomach because I knew I was responsible for all of it. My ex had smashed his eye socket, cheekbones, and jaw. There were bone fragments too small to piece back together. Ultimately, my ex was charged with a third-degree felony and sentenced to 7 years in prison. The sentence caused my sons to shout and protest, while my daughters and his family wailed in grief, a sound that haunts me to this day. The first 3 months after the trial were torturous. My soon-to-be ex-wife sued me for alienation of affection. My ex filed for divorce. My eldest son moved out, my other son locked himself in his room, and my twin daughters rebelled against me. My former sisters-in-law attacked me in the middle of a grocery store, and my ex-mother-in-law spat in my face when I tried to apologize. My father and brother refused to speak to me. I was blacklisted in my field because of the scandal, so I had to take a retail job and worked as a seasonal tax adjuster just to make ends meet. I almost lost the house. Every time I tried to visit my ex in prison, I was denied, and every letter I sent was returned. Crying in the shower became an almost daily occurrence. My parents' marriage was strained because my mother constantly defended me, while my father refused to acknowledge me. Even my lifelong friends were divided over my actions. I began to have thoughts of disappearing, of ending everything. The guilt was unbearable. Eventually, I saw a therapist who bluntly told me that I had gotten too comfortable with my ex. I had stopped seeing him as a husband and more as a friend with benefits, while he still saw me as his wife and the mother of his children. She was right. I had taken him for granted. Nearly a year passed in silence from my children. When I cooked dinner, they would take their food and retreat to their rooms, refusing to speak to me. I had several emotional breakdowns, begging them to say something, anything, but they wouldn't. When my brother got married, I wasn't invited, but my kids were. I continued trying to visit my ex, hoping he had added me to the visitor list, but I was always turned away. My letters were still being returned, and it only deepened my depression. I knew I deserved it. Then, one day, out of the blue, my brother showed up at my house. It was the first time he had visited since the trial. I was shocked and, for a moment, hopeful. But he had only come to scold me. He told me that my ex had been stabbed in prison after an inmate tried to sexually assault him in his cell. My ex had defended himself and ended up breaking the inmate's spine, but not before getting stabbed in the stomach. My brother screamed at me, "You did this," before storming back to his truck. He was right, I had caused all of this. I cried for days after that. I tried to visit my ex in the infirmary, but I was still denied. For 4 more years, I tried to talk to him, still wrote letters, but they were always returned. Thankfully, our children visited him often, and through them, I learned that my brother had arranged for him to be placed in protective custody after the attack. You've carried a heavy burden for a long time, and your reflections show just how deeply you regret the choices that led to this situation. The longing for forgiveness, the desire to reconnect with your family, and the pain of seeing them happy without you, it's all incredibly difficult to bear. It's clear that you are deeply remorseful and want to make amends. That healing, both for yourself and for your family, patience and understanding. It's natural to want to fix things immediately, but some wounds take longer to heal, especially when trust has been broken so deeply. The steps you've taken to try and make things right, reaching out to your children, attempting to reconnect with your ex-husband, are meaningful, even if they haven't led to the reconciliation you desire. It's possible that, over time, consistent efforts and patience might open the door to more communication. However, it's also important to acknowledge that some things may not return to the way they once were, and finding a way to accept that while still holding on to hope can be a difficult balance. You mentioned that your ex-husband's release brought your children joy and that they were happier and more cheerful because of his presence in their lives. It's understandable that this would stir up complex emotions for you, happiness for them, but also a sense of loss for yourself. As hard as it is, continuing to focus on your own healing and personal growth can be beneficial, not only for you but also for those relationships you hope to mend. Therapy, self-reflection, and finding peace within yourself may be necessary steps along the way. Your desire to apologize, to express your remorse, and to explain your feelings to your family is valid. If and when the opportunity arises, speaking from the heart might help bridge the gap. In the meantime, showing them through your actions that you're committed to being a better version of yourself might slowly build trust. It's a painful path you're on, and there's no easy solution. But acknowledging the hurt, facing the consequences of your actions, and striving to do better, those are significant steps toward healing, even if the outcome remains uncertain. Thank you very much for watching to the story so far. I suggest you to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss tomorrow's stories.